This is Rob Kilmer. California is a snapshot of America right now, and when it comes to being a true American, Tom Ridge gets it. We'll talk about that this week on You Defend It. Welcome to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. As always, callers to the show will need to take a position, be able to defend it with an argument that is factual, not emotional. And if you can't make your point without insulting someone, you can't make your point on this show. Callers and guests will be treated with complete respect. For my part, I will ask questions that matter and give people the opportunity to answer. My website is www.youdefendit.com. That's youdefendit.com. You can give me your comments on the show anytime. By Friday of each week, I will have the topics up for the coming show. You can also visit my blog through the site, read my posts, and leave your own. The lineup for Sunday talk shows will also be posted there on Saturdays if they are posted online before my show and I can get to them. You can always listen to my show live on streaming audio on www.wnbf.com, and my show is then uploaded to youdefendit.com later on Saturdays, and you can listen to it from there if you missed it live. Finally, there is a new debate suggestions section on my website. It is at the top of the homepage. You can leave me your thoughts on topics, debaters, and questions. All right, this week we're going to talk about California and how it is a snapshot of America right now when it comes to its finances. California's system allows the voters to essentially approve or disapprove of portions of the budget. Through ballot initiatives or ballot propositions, they can determine what parts of the budget are passed or rejected. May 19th, there were 5 on the, they went to the polls for 5 ballot propositions. Propositions 1A through 1E. They only approved one of them, and I'll get to that in a minute. I'm going to tell you about all of them. But a little background, they have an enormous budget deficit. And the propositions were intended to address, in part, that deficit. I'm going to tell you what the propositions were and what happened to them and what I think that means, because I think it's fascinating. It's America. It's the complete lack of discipline when it comes to money. This, by the way, this process right now will be followed by an outcry when the cuts come. It is people who, it is a generation that wants things without paying for them, period. So let's go through them. Proposition 1A. Now on the ballot, it was summarized, but I looked at the proposition. I looked at all of them. It's 2.5 pages, single-spaced. Now nobody read that before they voted on this. I guarantee you that. Or if anybody did, I would say a small percentage of people actually read the fine print of the ballot initiative. Proposition 1A. It increased the size of the state rainy day fund from 5% to 12.5% of the general fund. A portion of the annual deposits into that fund would be dedicated to savings for future economic downturns, and the remainder would be available to fund education, infrastructure, debt repayment, or for use in a declared emergency. And it would require additional revenue above historic trends to be deposited into a state rainy day fund, limiting spending. So what does that mean? 1A, put money away for the future to avoid situations exactly like this. It was defeated. Proposition 1B. Now this was only 5 paragraphs, single-spaced. And when I say that I read it, I went to the official website of the state to read the text of this. Proposition 1B, called Education Funding Payment Plan. This required supplemental payments to local school districts and communities and community colleges to address the recent budget cuts. The annual payments would begin in 2011-2012. The payments were to be funded from the state's Budget Stabilization Fund until the total amount was paid, and payments to local school districts would be allocated in proportion to average daily attendance and may be used for classroom instruction, textbooks, and other local education programs. Defeated. What would this have done? Obviously, it would have provided money for education in California. That was defeated. Proposition 1C, the Lottery Modernization Act. Allows the state lottery to be modernized to improve its performance with increased payouts, improved marketing, and effective management. It required the state to maintain ownership of the lottery and authorized additional accountability measures. It protected funding levels for schools currently provided by lottery revenues. And increased lottery revenues were to be used to address current budget deficit and reduce the need for additional tax increases and cuts to state programs. Defeated. I'm sure a Californian could tell you why this was so objectionable. It's hard to determine on its face what the problem was with this, but perhaps a philosophical problem that many people have, linking lotteries with education funding. But in any event, it was defeated. Proposition 1D. This was, by the way, the Lottery Modernization Act was 5 pages, single-spaced. Proposition 1D, 2 pages, single-spaced, but not on the ballot, just a summary, like all of them. This protects children's services funding, helps balance state budget. Proposition 1D provided more than $600 million to protect children's programs in difficult economic times, redirected existing tobacco tax money to protect health and human services for children, including services for at-risk families, services for children with disabilities, and services for foster children. Temporarily allowed the redirection of existing money to fund health and human service programs for children 5 and younger. It ensured counties retained funding for local priorities. It helped balance the state budget. Defeated. Proposition 1E. Actually, there were 6. Propositions. This was 2 pages, single-spaced. Mental health services funding. Temporary reallocation. This amended the Health Services Act, which was Proposition 63 in 2004, to transfer funds for a 2-year period from mental health programs to pay for mental health services for children and young adults provided through the early and periodic screening, diagnosis, and treatment program. It would have provided more than $225 million in flexible funding for mental health programs, and it was designed to or intended to help balance the state budget during difficult economic times. Defeated. Now the last one. This one, Proposition 1F, was 1 page, single-spaced in the actual text, not on the ballot, but in the text of the law itself. This one was called Elected Officials' Salaries, Prevention of Pay Increases During Budget Deficit Years. This encouraged balanced state budgets by preventing elected members of the legislature and statewide constitutional officers, including the governor, from receiving pay raises in years when the state is running a deficit. It directed the Director of Finance to determine whether a given year is a deficit year. And it prevented the Citizens Compensation Commission from increasing elected official salaries in years when the state special fund for economic uncertainties is in the negative by an amount equal to or greater than 1% of the general fund. this one passed. So, out of the 6, Californians rejected 5 that had some relationship to addressing the state's budget deficit, and passed the 6th that said if there's a deficit, legislators don't, and the governor, don't get pay increases. To me, this is a perfect example of the mindset of America today when it comes to money. It's perfect. When I saw, usually I wait throughout the week and I kind of wait till the last minute to decide on what I'm going to do my show on, and then I spend a day or so preparing it. This week, May 19th was when the vote was. On May 20th, I knew it was going to be California. That was going to be the topic this week. We will be right back, and when we do, I will read you an article from May 20th, which contains in it the governor's ideas, now that the options that were on the ballots have been eliminated, what he's going to do, or what he's proposing to eliminate the budget deficit. We'll be right back. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. And speaking of that, where is Frank from Appalachian? It has been weeks. A show without Frank is like a day without sunshine. I don't have him. He hasn't called in almost a month, I think. I want to know what happened to Frank from Appalachian. Okay. I'm going to read to you from an article that appeared on CNN Online the day after the ballot initiatives or propositions failed in California. May 20th, 2009, CNN Online. Note to Californians, get ready for larger class sizes, fewer police patrolling the streets, and more public offices shuttered on weekdays. State officials are now scrambling to close a $21.3 billion fiscal shortfall, a gap that grew by $6 billion overnight after residents voted down 5 budget propositions Tuesday. The state must make, quote, severe cuts now, end quote, Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger said Wednesday. Quote, there will be around $5.3 billion in additional cuts in education. There will be severe cuts in health care, which is another area where you know we spend a lot of money. And then, of course, you have to go and look in other areas like prisons, end quote, said the governor, who was in Washington, D.C., meeting with the Obama administration. The state comptroller already had to delay $3 billion in payments in February because of a lack of cash. Californians' options are more limited than most. Leaders are constrained by having the nation's lowest state bond rating, which makes borrowing more expensive, and by a multitude of voter-approved propositions that dictate spending. Quote, they are not flush with choices, end quote, said Jerry Nicholsberg, senior economist at the UCLA's Anderson Forecast. Officials will look to education, health care, and prisons because, quote, they are about the only places you can find the money, end quote. Last week, the governor said that if the propositions are defeated, he'd be forced to cut another $2.3 billion from the education budget, eliminate funding for substance abuse treatment, crime prevention, AIDS education and prevention and outreach efforts by the state public college systems. He would also have to borrow $2 billion from local governments, forcing them to cut back their spending on law enforcement and other services. California residents will likely see teachers laid off and a shorter school year, said Daniel J.B. Mitchell, professor of management and public policy at the University of California at Los Angeles. Already the Los Angeles court system announced it will be closed one day a month to conserve funds. Quote, "There's no end to things you can cut," end quote, Mitchell said. That's the end of that article. Now you watch the outcry. This has to be done by June 30th. The budget has to be passed by June 30th. So between now and then, the governor will announce his cuts, and there will be an outcry. People will go crazy. Well, you can't cut that. And that'll be the theme. I know the state's in trouble. I know we need to cut things, but you can't cut that. Which is essentially the same logic that produced the defeat of 5 of the ballot initiatives. People saying, I know the state needs money, but we don't need to fund this. We don't need to tax that. We don't need to come up with revenue, not that way. We can't do it that way. The only thing that passed, this is true irony. It is the citizens, through the ballot propositions, that determine the spending to a large extent. And the only ballot proposition that passed was the one that denied raises to legislators when there's a deficit. In the meantime, the citizens don't want to pay extra. They don't want to find ways to come up with extra revenue to pay for things that they already have. And that's America right now. We don't want to pay for things that we already have. That's actually a good working definition of a national deficit. We want them. We're gonna get them. But we're not paying for them. I actually saw a great exchange between Sean Hannity and Jesse Ventura this week. I don't know why on earth Sean Hannity invited him on his show. Jesse Ventura seemed intent upon ripping Sean Hannity's head off from the second he sat down. 2 minutes into it, Hannity says something to him about, aren't you concerned or terrified about the deficits under the Obama administration? And it was like Jesse Ventura had been waiting his whole life for somebody to ask him that. He said, "Sean, at least the Democrats go cash and carry. They pay for it. You go crazy when taxes go up, but they pay for it. Republicans put it on a credit card. They spend just as much. They just don't pay for it." We are a society that when it comes to government, there's no relationship in our minds between item and cost. We want certain things. We expect certain things. We don't want to pay for them. But we fully expect to have them. And I think watching California right now, it is a classic example. Fortunately, in California, the situation will have to be resolved, and we will all get to see how that happens. Things are going to get cut. You got to laugh. Right now, people are saying, well, we can't close Guantanamo. We'll be bringing people here. What are we going to house those people in American prisons? First of all, what's wrong with American prisons? Nobody's ever escaped from a federal maximum security prison, ever. We've already got terrorists there. Do we really have, this is like I say about trying these people, do we have so little faith in our prosecutors that we're afraid to try them? We have the best prosecutors in the world. Try them. If they're guilty, particularly if they're guilty of killing Americans, then kill them. But get on with it. Same thing with bringing prisoners to America. Do we have that little faith in our prison system? Are you kidding me? Do you mean to tell me that there is a reasonable likelihood that people in maximum security are going to escape? Where's your proof? Other than fear-mongering, what's your evidence? There's none. Nobody's ever escaped, and it's not like they're going to be conspiring in prison. In the maximum security prisons, these people are isolated. But here we are having this debate on one subject about we can't close Guantanamo because we'd be bringing dangerous people here. In California, they're going to be letting dangerous people out. And the public doesn't want it. If you put that on a ballot proposition, they'd reject that too. But guess what? They're getting it. Because they refuse to approve ways to pay for things they already have. Now the pain comes. When you're cutting health care and education and law enforcement, it begs the question, what is it you are willing to pay for? The ballot propositions contained funding for health care, education, and law enforcement. And they were defeated. But you watch. I don't know, but I suspect that right now the California economy is in far worse shape than it was when Gray Davis was removed from office. I also suspect that Arnold Schwarzenegger is taking the steps necessary to make California. He doesn't seem angry about this. He almost seems to be looking forward to the opportunity to cut costs. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I don't mean to imply that Arnold Schwarzenegger has something against children's education or health care or security on the streets for people when it comes to releasing people from prison. I think he's genuinely interested in cutting costs. And this is a classic case of be careful what you wish for, because Californians, through Arnold Schwarzenegger, are going to get what they wish for, and they're going to be furious about it, as the rest of America would be and will be once we start cutting things. We're going to take a quick break in a few seconds here for local news and be back right after that. When we come back, I'll talk a little bit more about, we'll talk about Tom Ridge and something he said this week. Or actually, it's something that he said in an interview that was taped this week that will air tomorrow. But I thought it was great. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. The phone number to call into the show is 772-1290. All right, we left off talking about California and how Californians have rejected increased funding for several different areas, including but not limited to mental health, education, a rainy day fund, law enforcement. So now the governor's going to do it for him. And he'll get a tremendous fight from the legislature. But they have to pass a budget by the end of June. And in some ways, the people have made it easy for him. They've spoken. They're not willing to pay. At least they've indicated so far. For certain things. So he's going to cut them. And you wait and see what happens then. All right, I am pleased to announce the return of Frank from Appalachian. Frank, you there?
Hi there, Rob.
How are you?
Hi. This is the Jesse Ventura of Appalachian.
Well,
hey, I heard you earlier. I had two medical problems, and it just tossed me for a loop. I was totally wiped out. So this is the first day that I felt, halfway normal, so I figured I'd call in.
Well, I appreciate you calling.
Good. I got some comments about California and also about the latest poll I've heard about changes in political party membership.
Okay.
I like what the Californians are doing. Basically, I think what they're saying is cut spending and cut the bailouts.
I do too. I'm just waiting for when the reality hits. I think they have embraced a theory of cutting spending.
Right.
Just wait till he does it.
Well, when you have billions or trillions of dollars, which you're using for bailouts and giveaway programs, how do you pay for them? I mean, you can increase taxes, right?
Right.
You can decrease services, or you can increase revenues by, and you know, these are somewhat debatable, by various means. You can have a huge building boom, like Bush had, when you have cheap mortgages. You can have a huge technological revolution, and those don't come around too long. I mean, we had the dot-com bubble, the internet, and in the future, I think you're going to see a push if we get somebody with some brain power, unlimited power by hydrogen fusion. The latest, and this is pretty interesting if you look at the big picture, how the political party membership is changing. And I got this information yesterday, and I just did a little quick math on it. Republican Party, 26 to 22%. This is over the last about 5 or 6 months.
They've gone from 26 to 22 over the last 5 months?
Yeah, that's a little bit over 15%. But the Democratic Party has gone from 39 to 33%. And that's also a little bit over 15%. Guess which party has gone up?
The independents?
Absolutely, 30 to 39%. And that's roughly 30%. There's a little differential, about 1% in there. I don't know what happened there. But, this is important. When I talked to people last fall, and I talked to, both parties, the Republicans didn't really want to vote for either party. I mean, they were just fed up. I don't know exactly, what the Democrats were doing at that point. I talked mainly to Republicans. So it looks as if, people are just fed up and they're going to another venue, and that happens to be the Independent Party right now.
Well, and I think, and I'm going to get to that with Tom Ridge, actually.
Oh.
I think, not that he's changed parties from Republican to Independent, but the thoughts he expressed on tape, which will be aired tomorrow, I think, are absolutely perfect. I got to get to one more call.
Okay.
Frank, thanks for calling. I hope
Sure.
you call back next week.
Mm-hmm. Bye-bye.
Bye. We have Lucas on the line. Are you there?
Yes, I am. Now,
Welcome to the show.
Yes, thank you. As far as the situation in California, I mean, this is a situation that gets replicated over time all over the place. And what happens is that you have people, whoever's in government, whichever party, they decide, we can win votes by spending money on this, that, and the other thing, and they sell the people on it that's not going to cost them. Then the true costs come in, and the people balk at having to pay more and higher taxes for a lot of things that they know about and a lot of things they don't know about. What happens is when the politicians are told no when it comes to raising taxes and all the rest, then they turn around and they decide to cut. And what they cut are the things they know that are essential. It's sort of like cutting, in other words, like when they say, I'm going to cut away the fat, what they do is they cut away the muscle and bone and leave the fat. And what happens is with a lot of government, is there's a lot of things that the money's being spent on that you would have an overwhelming majority of people say, no, you shouldn't spend money on that, but they're going to keep on spending money on that, and that will never be put on the table to be cut. For example, in California, you have all these sanctuary cities and all that where they won't let the police to even touch illegal immigrants, and they get a huge crime problem as a result. And when you could simply save a huge amount of the money that they pay out in public assistance and everything else, simply require anyone who collects public assistance to be either a citizen of the United States or a legal resident. In other words, someone who immigrated to this country legally. Because most of the criminals and a lot of the people that are collecting welfare are people who came into this country illegally.
I don't know if that's. I just want to say I don't know if it's a higher percentage. And I've heard this debated. I don't know if it is a higher percentage of people in prison in California who are there illegally than are residents or there legally. I think it is. I think it is about. I think it is. It is. I don't think that there is any disproportionate ratio of illegal people in prison in California, illegal immigrants for crimes committed in California, than as it relates to the general population. But let me ask you this. Then, if that's the case, why would you cut? I mean, Schwarzenegger has all but come out and said, "I'm gonna let people out of prison early."
Well, part of the whole thing is you have to look past the Republican-Democrat label to see who is conservative, who is liberal. And what's happened is in both parties, the liberals have been in the driver's seat for the last decade, which has got us into trouble. Remember, there was very clear choices when they had that recall election, and there were several different Republicans vying for the things.
In California?
Yeah, in California.
Right.
I mean, Schwarzenegger was, of the four guys that were out there, Schwarzenegger was the one who was furthest to the left of the four. And Schwarzenegger was the one who was endorsed by Bush. Although surveys at the time show that if Bush was truly a conservative, he could have gone with Mr. McClintock, who he was a veteran California legislator and had held some statewide office of some sort. And if he had been endorsed by Bush and people believed that McClintock would win, a majority of the people in California would have even voted for McClintock rather than Schwarzenegger. But the thing is the Bush endorsement at that time made the difference and put Schwarzenegger over the top.
But if it's true that it's liberals that are being voted in, then it would have to be liberal-minded people who are doing the voting. And my question is, how do you square that with the fact that they don't want to pay for anything?
Well, part of it is a lot of people, when they go out there and say who is liberal and who's conservative, well, let's say to a communist, a socialist is a conservative. To a socialist, a liberal is a conservative.
But
and
just,
what happens,
let me just...
And so what happens is all Republicans have been branded as conservatives when that's not the case, just as there are some Democrats, though very few of them at the congressional level, who are conservatives, but they're generally branded entirely as liberals because the liberals are dominant and have been dominant in the party for at least a generation.
I gotta end the call here because I gotta get to one point before the end of the show. But here's my broader point. Forget party registration. Forget all that. The premise, I think, of what you're saying is that people who are perceived as more liberal are voted in, and they are presumably voted in by people who are liberal or who want a liberal in there. So people who themselves are liberal to some extent. And I think the whole, even getting beyond Democrat and Republican, even the liberal conservative, that whole thing misses the point, because when it gets down to it, people, Americans in general, they want things and they don't want to pay for them. Both parties, both liberals, conservatives, when it comes to the liberals, as we see in California, they want all these things. They don't want to pay for them. They've rejected every measure to pay for them. Now they're going to lose them. On the national level, 90% of our national debt, has been run up under Republican presidents. And they borrow the money. Not one time since Ronald Reagan took office has spending decreased, ever. Under Reagan, Bush, Clinton, Bush, Obama. Nobody cut spending. This whole we're going to have to get back to cutting, it's a myth. It's a complete lie. Nobody's ever done it. You can't get back to something you never did. And I would suspect that you could extend this logic and find factual support for this nationwide. When's the last time a state spent less in year A than it spent the year before? I would say never. At least not in the last 20, 30 years. We all walk around with this ridiculous notion in our heads that we're going to get back to fiscal restraint when we've never had any. We have never spent less or even the same in one year as the year before. It's never happened. So to have this kind of loosely guiding us is ridiculous. The only issue left, in my mind, is how to pay for it. And I think there was a lot of merit to what Jesse Ventura, of all people, said. At least the Democrats pay for it as they go. It's not as if the public doesn't want this stuff. They embrace it, all this spending. To borrow to pay for it, that seems to me to be the irresponsible part. If you're going to spend more, if you're the party that says, if you're the party that's borrowing the money, then you have an obligation to spend less, because you're incurring greater costs for those things than you would be if you paid for them in cash. But that's not what we have. We have both parties spending more every year. Every year. One party raises taxes to pay for it. The other party cuts taxes and borrows. It's a legitimate debate as to what is more responsible. Lucas, thank you very much for staying on the line. Hope you call back next week. And I just don't know how we ever got to this point where we actually believe we can return to this better time when we spent less money and we were a more disciplined country. In the last almost 30 years since Reagan took office, it hasn't happened. Not once. Every year we have spent more than the year before. And this notion that we're going to be getting back to fiscal restraint, it's just an outright fraud. There are no facts to support that whatsoever. Nothing. All right, when we come back, we are going to talk about Tom Ridge. You are listening to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer right here on News Radio 1290 WNBF Binghamton. Welcome back to You Defend It with Rob Kilmer. All right, tomorrow on CNN's State of the Union, there will be an interview with Tom Ridge. And I want to read to you from an article that's already out about that interview. Again, it won't be aired until tomorrow, but I saw this on I think it was CNN's website today. In an interview airing this Sunday on CNN's State of the Union, former Bush administration Homeland Security Secretary Tom Ridge told John King that he thinks former Vice President Dick Cheney is wrong in his assertion that the Obama administration has made the country less safe. Ridge also expressed disappointment in President Obama's characterization of the Bush administration. King: you had the intelligence. You served in a very sensitive position in those days after 9/11. Do you believe we are less safe today because of the steps taken by President Obama? Ridge: I do not. King: do you disagree with Dick Cheney then? Ridge: yeah, I disagree with Dick Cheney. But I also disagree with the approach both men are taking. At the end of the day, e pluribus unum. We're in this together. At the end of the day, it is a challenge that we're going to need to confront together. That's the end of the article. E pluribus unum, by the way, literally translated from Latin, means out of many, one. That's the best thing I've heard on TV in a long time. And touched on it with Frank and with Lucas today. You know what's liberating? Ignoring the parties. And it's hard to do. It's really hard to do. Depending on your background or your involvement with politics, it is hard to do it. And particularly what you listen to and hear and watch. I mean, you are emotionally bombarded when it comes to talk radio and cable. But if you can ignore it all and think logically for a minute, I think there's no surprise that, as Frank said, people are shifting towards the Independence Party. And that's because there's a growing feeling in this country that feeling we've had all our lives, that everything's going to work out. That's not necessarily true. It's going to work out. I think people believe now it's going to work out if we make it work out. Not until, not unless. That's a prerequisite now, our involvement. Talking heads screaming at us who to blame, hate, and fear isn't going to get it done. Anyone who blindly defends Democrats or Republicans is making it up half the time. They have to be. The facts of this world do not assign themselves to an ideology. They just are. You have heard me rail on this show for 20 months now about the people who seek to divide Americans, the Obermans, the Limbaughs, the Hannitys. I have said 1,000 times that what they do is divisive and destructive. What I don't say enough is that they're idiots. If they really believe what they're saying, just think what has to be going on in their heads before they speak. Here is what they know in advance of any situation before it comes up. The other side caused it and my side can fix it. They know in advance. Those are not the words of a rational, objective, thinking individual. Those are the kinds of comments you hear when you pull the string on the back of a doll. That's what they do. It is predetermined what they will say. That's ridiculous. The reason that my debates are going to be run like oral argument is because it will eliminate 90% of what you hear everywhere else. It has to. It's based on logic and proof. Two things that are completely absent on the talk shows and radio. It is liberating to look away from the parties. I've been a Democrat for, 15 years. I had been a Republican before that. You can't buy in because you are not being sold an honest product by either side. All they want is to be there to tell you. That's it. All they want is to be in office. All they want is to be listened to. Much of that has nothing to do with the truth. Decide for yourself what the truth is. Think about it in terms of your own life or your own home. Could you run a house the way these people run the country? Could you keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing? Within your own family, could you ever live by resolving or attempting to resolve or having arguments that involved not just the issue, but telling people, the person I'm arguing with, they're not just wrong. You should be afraid of them. You should hate them. You should fear them. You need to blame them. Does it work that way in your own life? Of course not. It never could. There's no reason to listen to it on television or radio that way either and accept it. It's not real. There is a massive financial incentive for these people to draw you to them emotionally. And how do you do that? You make them fearful, you make them hateful. You can't just disagree with somebody, you've got to fear them. You got to make the public nervous about them. You have to undermine them. That's not what happens in court. And it's no coincidence that decisions are reached in court. So, I think that what Frank said and what Lucas said, as far as getting away from the labels, both right. And I think Americans are doing that, as evidenced by the statistics that Frank quoted. There's just no rational way to look at things and still adhere to partisan beliefs. The facts don't present themselves that way. It doesn't work that way. And I think Americans are learning that and moving away from the hard lines of both parties. I mean, we've had a two-party system forever. Each party has been in power. How are things right now? Resolved? I don't think so. It doesn't appear that way to me. Thank you for listening to You Defend It. And please visit my website, www.youdefendit.com, to give me your comments and suggestions and to see the topic for next week's show. I am Rob Kilmer, and we will see you next week. I'm going to do that again. I am Rob Kilmer, and we will see you next week.